We've got the campaign Comfort, and statistics will show that they've supported about 70,000 girls to go to secondary school. So there's clearly that focus on girls. In fact, the Ministry of Education has a girls' education unit, and girls' education professionals who are there to make sure that they provide things like, you know, bicycles for girls in the rural settings to go to school. So we are working towards it, but there's still a lot of work to be done. Access to land. I believe my colleague mentioned it, that in Ghana, I would say 70% of food crop farmers are women. But the statistics show that the percentage that actually own the land, have the access to the land and the economic resources out of it, are quite disappointing. So that hasn't happened. The legal framework is, briefly, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, 1979, our Constitution again, the UN Declaration of the Elimination of Violence Against Women, 1993, the UN Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. This was the 4th UN conference to discuss women and domestic violence in 1995, and the Maputo Protocol, adopted by the AU in 2003, which will be discussed by my colleague later on in the day. Now, in relation to CEDAW 1986, it was a clear commitment. We ratified that in 1986. It was a clear commitment to eliminate all forms of discrimination in both public and private lives. This is a very important point because you find that civil rights, the protection of civil rights in public life is very different from what happens in our private lives. So the fact that that was recognized in CEDAW was a good step. And it championed all ratifying members to abolish all existing laws and customs that discriminate and put together establishments against discrimination. Now, our Constitution is a very encouraging piece. It guarantees human rights generally, but apart from that, it goes beyond that and talks about, it guarantees human rights generally, but apart from that, it goes beyond that and talks about gender equality and freedom. It actually talks about access to property jointly acquired during marriage. And it goes further to say Parliament should enact legislation to protect this. It prohibits customary practices that dehumanizes and injures physical and mental well-being, and that goes straight to domestic violence. The UN Declaration of the Elimination of Violence in 1993 against women is an international consensus on protection of women from violence. And it recognizes all forms of abuse, including threats of harm. Progress. So in Ghana, in line with all of this, we amended our criminal code, 1990 criminal code. Female genital mutilation is now a second-degree felony. It attracts a 3-year prison, 3 years imprisonment. Trochasy, you know trochasy? It is fetish servitude, where a family is meant to have committed a wrongdoing and they have to offer one of their daughters as payment to the fetish priest, as atonement. And sometimes it goes beyond that. You have not just the first daughter being offered. If she doesn't go and toe the line, the second daughter will follow, and the third. And sometimes the crimes are so negligible that you wonder how people get involved in this. But it happens. It's prevalent, certainly in Ghana, Togo, and those areas. But it's a criminal offense in Ghana. Sexual offenses have been strengthened in terms of definition and punishment. Now, the Commission of Human Rights and Administrative Justice Act 1993 was passed pursuant to our Constitution. Now, this is a unit which is charged with dealing with cases in relation to fundamental human rights violation, and it includes women and children. In 1998, there was a Gender Studies and Human Rights Documentation study by a gender center in Ghana, 1998, because we realized that we didn't really have the data necessary to find out how often domestic violence was taking place, what the impacts were, and therefore they did a national study and came up with the data, and that served as the impetus for our Domestic Violence Act 2007. We do not take this for granted, because I was reading the other day that 49 countries don't have any legislation in relation to domestic violence. So that alone shows how difficult or how challenging our journey is globally. There was a national, and there have been a number of initiatives by our ministry that I've just singled out two. The National Gender Policy in 2015, and that was to ensure that gender became mainstream part of the conversation rather than an afterthought. That when it came to women, children, and other vulnerable people in our society, it should very much be part of the main conversation rather than shelved and dealt with differently. We have an affirmative action bill in the offing. It's not been passed, but we hope it will be passed. So state agencies involved are SHRAJ, as I mentioned, the Commission for Human Rights Administrative Justice. We had a women and juvenile unit of the Ghana Police focused on domestic violence, but that's been replaced by the Domestic Violence and Support Unit known as DOVSU. DOVSU is very active in Ghana. It has offices in all the 10 regions and some districts, and they focus purely on domestic violence, how it impacts the family. They prosecute cases, they assist victims with counseling and other services. So that's quite active. We have a child trafficking unit of the Ghana Police. I've had direct dealings with them, and I have to say they are very efficient. So it's quite heartwarming to know. And then the Ministry of Gender and Children and Social Protection is quite active in pursuing gender-related issues. But although we've come far, it's always important to realize that we haven't come far enough. For example, we have the Property of Spouses Bill pursuant to our constitution, which says that there has to be specific legislation to do with how property is distributed post separation and divorce. And that has not been passed. The bill has existed since 2009. And my learned friend here, Mrs. Kumar, will tell you that she's worked tirelessly to make sure this is passed, but it still hasn't. And I think it stems from the mindset. The mindset is a key stumbling block, we find, because although women are advancing, and in fact it's showing that there's improvement. Domestic violence is reduced, is not eradicated. It's very much dealt with as, well, you can do the fighting, but we will not define the legislature for you, because once it's defined, there's no going back. So many a time, women are left at the mercy of judicial discretion to decide what is just and equitable. They're having to prove their non-financial contribution, because sometimes your husband does all the work, and you keep the home for your husband to be successful. But when it comes to divorce, they want to see what you've contributed financially. Thankfully, our judiciary are very forward-looking, and there have been some recent years to suggest that non-financial contribution is still the same as financial contribution. So, in a nutshell, that's where we are in Ghana. We are still working every day to make sure that we transform our societies so that our girl children will grow up and see strong women who fight and show that women have an equal seat at the table. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, madam. Before we go to the next speaker, Rachel Kelsey, we will have a photo session with the members of the high table. Please, let's do the photo session as fast as possible.
Please turn on the souls of my feet. There's somewhere
guest speakers should please join the photo session. All guest speakers.